This video is for my father and anyone into graphic novels about the history of comics, as well as anyone looking for cool stuff to do with their kids. If that's not you, scroll on. So I had heard of Nancy in my life. I knew it was a famous comic. I could recognize her. I'm not sure I ever read any. And I certainly had no idea that she had this cult following for a reason. Until I was reading on Boing Boing and I saw this new graphic novel, 3 Rocks, came out. And it's about the life of Ernie Bushmiller, who didn't invent Nancy, but he took her to this famous level for decades, where she is a cult classic now. And it's by Bill Griffith. Who you know the history of underground comics, he's the guy who did Zippy. So here is one of the heroes of the underground comic world making a really beautiful graphic novel called 3 Rocks about how good Ernie Bushmiller was at what he did, and also just the times of having a comic during the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. And so it's a mix of telling his story and also how the strip evolved. And it's a beautiful tribute because the only Nancy that appears in this book is actually from him, from Ernie Bushmiller, and it's all collaged together. I just can't emphasize what a cool look at the early history of comics that this book is. And so I started reading it and I got inspired because some of the strips I read in there were really funny. So I bought the only Nancy that I could afford here in France. Because the collections are really expensive. I don't know how it is in the States, but this one is actually in French, which I guess is good for my French, but the English ones were hundreds of dollars, so I could score this one. And mostly I'm not having any translation problems. It's not too hard. But they're wonderful. It is, 3 panels, usually very simple visually, but Nancy is this little anarchist. And she'll just look at the camera and do exactly what she wants. And sometimes it gets quite surreal, knowing that it's in a comic book world. Ernie Bushmiller knew it's not kids reading comics. They're for adults. And so he wrote adult humor. And by the way, Nancy's Tante Fritzy, in the old flapper style, she looks like she's from another comic and a much racier one. But she's a great foil for Nancy. And so we have had so much fun, my 6-year-old and I, reading these Nancy strips, because she's old enough to get it. And at the end would always be the snapper. Ernie would often see the picture at the end and then build the story towards that. He was always looking for the snapper. And so now my kid and I are talking about snappers and reading through this and just delighting. And she's learning about ration stamps in World War II and stuff like that. But Nancy is a fantastic strip to read with your kid. And if you want to learn about the history of the comic books industry and what that was like, 3 Rocks by Bill Griffith is wonderful.